What if I told you there's a Chinese story about a divine woman who shaped people from river clay, and that her earliest, hurried creations still nudge your temperament tonight? In one telling, the goddess Nüwa knelt by the yellow river and rolled figures between her fingers. Some she formed with patient care, others she flicked from slung mud, quick and imperfect, because the world needed people fast. Imagine it, a myth older than empires, implying that a dash of haste or a streak of stubborn resilience might be the echo of cosmic timing, baked into humanity like a fingerprint in drying clay. You don't have to cross the Pacific to feel these myths breathing near you. Your phone's glow rides on silicon born of sand, kin to the silt that fed Nua's hands. Your cupboard's tea, whether you call it tea, te, or chai, carries syllables that traveled on caravans and ships guided by dragon lore and star gods. Your calendar's festivals and your city's Chinatown lanterns, the zodiac on a restaurant placemat, the word kung fu in a movie trailer. They're all soft shadows cast by ancient stories where immortals brewed elixirs on the moon and carp leapt waterfalls to become dragons. Even familiar ideas, balance, filial respect, the dignity of craft, are braided with tales in which emperors claimed the mandate of heaven and heroes learned to bend rather than break. Tonight, I'll guide you through a complete, gentle journey from the cracking of the primordial egg and the giant Pangu who pushed apart sky and earth, to Nüwa's compassion and the birth of humankind, to culture bringers like Fuxi, flood tamers like you the Great, and the starry bureaucracy of the Jade Emperor. We'll meet dragons that mean rain instead of terror, fox spirits that test the heart, warrior sages, moon goddesses, and a stone-born trickster who upended heaven before learning humility. We'll watch these myths slip into everyday life, into lantern festivals, red envelopes, porcelain kilns, compass needles, and the quiet grammar of family tables. To understand China, we begin at its dawn, not with armies or walls, but with breath on wet clay and the first names for thunder. Come with me, softly, to the time before roads, when the world was an uncarved hush and a single goddess reached into the river and lifted us into the light. The night opens like a folding fan over mountains that breathe in mist and let it go in slow, silvery sighs. Far below the ridgelines, the Yangtze slides past in a broad, patient body, dark as ink in a calligrapher's well. To the north, the yellow river moves with a different mood, restless, ochre, carrying the earth itself in its arms. Between them, villages settle into the contours of terraces and paddies, roofs curved like the backs of sleeping carp. You can almost hear the world adjusting its weight. A creak of bamboo, a rope's soft friction as a bucket lifts from a stone-lined well, the hush of wind flirting with paper windows. A temple sits where the mountain path widens. Its eaves hold the night the way cupped hands hold water. Inside, bronze bells wait in a row, thick-bodied, cool-skinned, their mouths turned toward the floor as if listening. When the priests strike them, the sound is not a clang, but a ripple, a tone that blooms and hangs in the cedar air. Now and then, a drum answers, a deep, measured heartbeat that steadies the corridor of time. Between each note, you might hear the whisper of robes, the soft footfall on wooden boards polished by generations of careful steps. The air is textured. Thread-like trails of incense climb and twist, drawing pale lines you could almost read. Sandalwood burns with a sweet, slightly resinous warmth. pine adds a crisp edge that hints at the forest outside. From somewhere deeper in the building comes the salt damp of stone, cool chambers carved from the mountain's ribs, where water gathers in seams and releases itself as a sparse, deliberate drip. In those small echoes, the world feels wide. Outside the temple, the slope drops toward a village lane. Dogs turn twice and sleep by doorways. A lantern sways above a threshold, its thin red skin glowing like a fruit in late summer. You can smell tonight's cooking, chased by ash, rice steam, scallion oil, a faint breath of ginger. Someone rinses clay bowls at a courtyard spout. The water runs over bare hands and carries away heat. The gate creaks shut, and the hinge sings with a tone almost friendly. In the fields beyond, the paddies keep the sky in shallow squares. At dawn, they shine. At night, they listen. Water buffalo stand in the dikes, hide thick and patient, their breath leaving small clouds that fold into the mist. Crickets practice a steady rhythm that needs no conductor. If you lean close, just enough to hear without trying, you catch the small exchanges of the night shift. Frogs trading remarks, reeds tapping each other in a nervous little code. Further downstream, a market town cinches itself with a river wall. Even now, after shutters close, the stone remembers feet. In the dim lanes linger the day's voices, bargaining softened by courtesy, gossip landing like a sparrow, and then taking off again. You can trace the day by what remains. An orange peel flattened to a star, the thread end of silk caught on a cart nail, the faint perfume that a tea house wears even when empty. A bamboo flute is leaning against a stool inside, its surface warm where a hand held it, cool where the night has reached. Somewhere beyond the town, on a plateau open to the northern wind, a different kind of sound took root long ago. The yellow river, Huanghe, dragged Loess from far fields and braided it into sandbars and new banks. People learned to read its moods the way sailors read sky, throwing dikes like stitches and praying they'd hold. A farmer's day there begins before light, with the coarse music of tools, a mattock's thock in dry soil, the sift of millet from basket to bowl, the call and answer of neighbors, measuring the weather in glances. At dusk, that farmer might pause by a family altar, a plank darkened by oil and time, where tablets carry names like a corridor of quiet rooms. A curl of incense rises. The room grows both fuller and calmer, as if the air remembers everyone it has held. Across the empire's breadth, the court keeps a different clock. In a hall, paved with shadow and lamplight, courtiers move with the restraint of water poured from a high ladle. Silk whispers like distant rain. Jade pendants tap in a dignified metronome as officials bow, rise, and bow again. Documents unroll with a soft bark. Brush tips drink ink, and characters appear with the ease of practiced hands. Little architectures of meaning, precise as roof tiles. At the hall's center, a bronze vessel stands with 3 legs and a belly that can swallow fire. Its rim is cool to the fingertips, its skin traced with dragons that coil through clouds and come out elsewhere as rain. Priests move at the edge of state and sky, their chants measured, unhurried, spoken for ears both mortal and not. They keep records of eclipses and river heights and the year's good days, not because the heavens must obey, but because harmony is a craft. In their notes, gods are not distant landlords. They are neighbors with old habits, stormbringers who prefer certain hills, calm ones who love certain offerings, ancestors who visit if the room is ready. The rhythm of worship falls into everyday hands. A shopkeeper sets a tangerine under a house god. A sailor knots red thread and rubs it once for luck. A mother tucks a paper charm into a child's sleeve, and then, not trusting herself to say more, folds the sleeve twice. This is the bridge between then and now, built without announcement. A road worker hums a tune that was once a harvest prayer and doesn't know it. A craftsperson, choosing a tool by balance and grain, participates in a lesson older than written law, that the world prefers equilibrium. Porcelain clinks on a table. The tone carries a memory of kilns that burn day and night, their mouths breathing, their bodies glowing, workers tending them with the attentiveness of tending a child's fever. A scholar copies a line by lamplight, lamp oil simmering its soft odor into the room, and in the margin draws a tiny cloud, the kind clouds have worn in paintings for centuries, curled, companionable, almost awake. If you hold these places in one view, the mountain's spine, the fleece of river mist, the town's lanterns, the palace's bronze, the farmer's altar, you begin to feel how story and weather share an art. They come back in seasons, change their emphasis, but they return. The drums in the temple are for the gods, yes, but they are also for people who need a rhythm loud enough to steady the inner ear. The bells teach air to ring and then to rest. Incense writes a sentence upward and leaves the last word to the rafters. Here, the night's grammar is simple. Stone cools quickly, bronze more slowly, fire remembers for a long time. The gods we will meet, river guardians, sky administrators, foxes with ambitions, a goddess who once shaped us from the riverbank, are not apart from this texture. They are built into it, like gravel in a path or light in a window. Somewhere in the dark, a priest finishes a chant. Somewhere else, a child turns and clutches a sleeve. The mountain exhales. Water works its patient work. And in this gentler tempo, the old stories step forward, not with a shout, but with the calm confidence of things that have always been here, waiting for us to notice. Pangu, the first separation. In the hush before history, there was only an egg the size of possibility. Inside it, Pangu slept, the way a mountain might sleep, the way a thunderhead curls around its own patience. He woke into pressure, sky and earth pressed together, all things braided so tightly that nothing could move or breathe. His first breath was a wedge. With a swing of his axe, more intention than iron, he pried light from darkness. The bright rose and the heavy fell, but they kept trying to slide back, like doors that won't stay open. So Pangu stood between them and held. He grew a little every day for 18,000 years, a slow, deliberate stretching that let the sky climb and the earth settle. In that long labor, there was no audience, no praise, just the craft of balance, the oldest work. When his task was done and he lay down at last, his body did not vanish. It translated. His breath became the winds that lift cranes and rattle temple chimes. His voice sank into thunder, rolled thin as a drum skin over plains and hills. His left eye ripened into the sun, and his right eye cooled into the moon. Veins ran out as rivers. Bones rose into ranges. Hair seeded into forests. Even the smallest things, fleas, bacteria, the crumbs of the universe, took on lives of their own and learned the small, sweet habits of survival. You could say the world is Pangu's exhale held in a single long note. The distance between sky and earth, the gap where human lives fit, was his kindness. Nüwa, the maker and the mender. Where Pangu was a furnace, Nüwa was a steady hand. She came upon the fresh world and found it elegant but empty. By a river, the color of tea with milk, she pressed her fingers into wet silt and turned out small figures, arms, legs, faces, each with a different tilt of the mouth and arrangement of the eyes. Those she formed slowly were even-tempered, given to careful work. Those she slung from a twined cord and flicked to the ground, because the world needed people quickly, were impulsive, inventive, stubborn in bright ways. Both kinds laughed, sang, argued, learned to make soup and promises. For a time, the world went well. Then a quarrel among powers far above. Gong Gong of the waters, throwing himself in rage against Mount Buzo, the sky pillar, tilted the vault. Heaven slipped to the northwest. Earth heaved to the southeast, and calamity learned the map. Fires crawled like ravenous vines. Floods moved into the lowlands without knocking. Nüwa listened to 1,000 small cries and made a decision. She melted 5 colored stones, blue as a winter sky, yellow like ripe grain, white with a vein of milk, red with the blush of clay, black with secrets, and patched the sky where it had cracked. She took the legs from a great turtle and propped the corners of heaven so it would not sag again. She swept away monsters and, this part may be the quietest miracle, she cooled the sorrow that catastrophe had hammered into human throats. If creation was her joy, repair was her love. And love here did not roar. It stacked stones. It stitched. It kept watch while the world fell asleep again. Fuxi, the teacher of nets and lines. On a morning that smelled of reed beds, Fuxi noticed how fish moved, how birds took the sky in diagonal strokes. He watched water fold around obstacles and thought, what if a knot could remember the shape of a current? He twisted fibers into nets that repeated the river's mind, and suddenly dinner came home in patterns. He marked turtle shells, tracing the cracks left by heat into sets of 3 and broken lines. 8 little constellations of meaning. The Bagua, heaven above, earth below, fire, water, thunder, wind, lake, mountain. Elements not as objects, but as behaviors, as verbs. If the world had once been an egg, it was now also a grammar. Fuxi's students, hunters, farmers, midwives, merchants, learned to read change the way one reads weather on skin, to ask not, what is this? But, how does it move? In some tellings, he taught the first zither, the guqin, to let hands feel harmony and restraint. In others, he drew square and compass into the dust, and showed how a roof line carries the promise of shelter even before wood has been cut. People loved him for his usefulness, but the story rarely mentions his loneliness. To be the first to see a net in a river's thought is to spend long hours noticing what others skip. It is a kind of exile, gentle, but real. When he played the guqin at night, the notes walked out over water and came back without footprints. You the great, the long walk of patience. The yellow river could be a poet or a fist, sometimes both in one season. It changed its bed like a restless sleeper, and, in bad years, forgot the names of the towns it was supposed to pass. Before you, people tried to dam and block it. The river shrugged and found another shoulder to lean on. Yu's father, Gun, attempted to fix the floods by hoarding a self-growing earth. The story ends badly. Yu took a different road. Instead of stopping the water, he taught it where to go. He walked the width of the land with a spade like a staff. He listened to slopes, read the grain of hills, cut channels that let water choose the sea. 13 years he labored, and they say passed his own door 3 times without entering, because the mud on his boots and the hunger in his belly might carry harm home. People say such things when they want to measure devotion. But even if the detail grew in the telling, the heart of it remains. He made a path, not a prison. Floods became seasons instead of sentences. In the wake of Yu's patience rose a dynasty, Xia, and with it, the idea that power could be earned by service. A river blessed a man who listened to it. In turn, people listened to the man. The mandate of heaven, later emperors would wrap themselves in it like a cloak, began as a plain truth. When you do right by the world holds still long enough for crops to grow and children to reach the next festival. The quiet sorrows of the immortal stories love a bright edge, a victory, a cleverness, a new way. But the beings who carry those edges often live with duller notes that don't fade. Consider Chang'e, the woman who drank the elixir that would have made her husband, the archer Hu Yi, immortal. In one telling, she swallowed it to keep it from a thief. In another, desire lifted the cup to her lips. Either way, she rose, light as regret, to the moon. There she lives in a palace of cool light with only a jade rabbit for company, pounding herbs in a mortar that never grows lighter. At mid-autumn, when the moon is fat with attention, people eat round cakes and look up. The sweetness on the tongue is one part joy, one part the ache of distance. Think also of the dragon kings of the four seas, sovereigns with thunder in their throats, who answer prayers for rain. To rule water is to hold moods. In dry years, their courts are petitioned daily. In flood years, the petitions turn into accusations whispered in temple courtyards. To be needed by humans is to be judged by weather. Even immortals find that a little humiliating. And the fox spirit, the I Ching, slips between worlds with 9 tails like banners. In some stories, the fox is a seducer. In others, a faithful wife who becomes human through kindness and time. To live among mortals long enough to grow a conscience is to risk heartbreak. To keep 9 tails is to carry 9 versions of it. People and powers share the same glossary. Love that makes you leave home. Fidelity that feels like a weight. Betrayal that begins with fear and ends with a door closing more softly than you expected. Even the Jade Emperor, administrator of heaven's orderly bureaucracy, knows that the ink of justice dries slowly, and that mercy has to be added back in like water to thick paint. Level 2. Social context ancestors at the table. In kitchens and courtyards across centuries, wooden tablets bearing names face small bowls of fruit and cups of tea. The living bow 3 times not just to the past, but to continuity itself. The cult of ancestors is not morbid, it's conversational. It says, "We build with what you left, and we hope you can smell the oranges." When a child misbehaves, a parent might glance at the tablets as if to borrow patience. When a young person passes an exam, incense makes a thin celebration, and the smoke carries news where the postal system cannot. Through these rituals, myths become routines. Nüwa's mending becomes a habit of repair. Chairs fixed, friendships patched. Pangu's separation becomes the housekeeping of space, sweeping thresholds clean so the line between inside and out is clear. Yu's canals become the village drainage ditches, kept tidy before the monsoon. The thought is simple. Gratitude is a steadying weight on the scale of fortune. The Confucian room and the Taoist garden. 2 ways of living grew like twin vines on the same wall. In the Confucian room, order and ritual Li set the table. Hierarchies are not cages, but corridors. Each role, parent, child, teacher, student, comes with duties that, properly kept, create a music larger than any instrument. The myths supply exemplars. Fuxi the teacher who did not hoard knowledge. You, the ruler whose authority rose from service. Even the mandate of heaven is at heart an ethical tool. When rulers are crooked and the seasons sour, the people can say, the sky has taken back its seal. In the Taoist garden, the path is crooked on purpose. Water is a mentor. It yields and therefore lasts. The Bagua is not a fortune teller's toy, but a pocket map of behavior. Fire rises, water descends, thunder startles, then passes, mountains remain. To cultivate is to bend like bamboo and not crack. Here the myths show different faces. Nüwa teaches that repair is natural, that brokenness is a stage, not an identity. The Dragon Kings teach that power can be supple, like rain that never argues, yet changes everything it touches. People moved between room and garden as needed. A magistrate disciplined his household by Confucian rites, and then, sleepless, opened a Taoist text to quiet the churn of ambition. A farmer lit incense for ancestors and then stood in the field with hands behind his back, listening for the advice of wind. Dragons, phoenixes, and the moral weather dragons in this world are not hoarders on treasure heaps. They are moving weather, serpentine bridges between cloud and river. When a dragon arcs on a roof line, it is a wish for rain in the right months, for a temperate summer, and a winter that kills pests, but not hope. The phoenix, Feng Huang, is less a bird than a report about prosperity. It appears when the polity is harmonious, as if balance itself had grown feathers. The Qilin, with its deer body and fish scales, steps lightly to avoid crushing grass blades. It is what benevolence might look like if given hooves. These creatures taught people a virtue that technology sometimes forgets: to watch the sky and the water with humility. Dragon dances do not intimidate the year into obedience. They harmonize with it. The bright cloth and the coordinated steps say, "We remember who we are together." At a wedding, a phoenix and a dragon painted on porcelain promise complementarity, not conquest. Two strengths that fit like river and bank. The peasants bargain with the earth. When the Yellow River turned out of its bed, it wasn't a headline. It was a new geography. Villagers stacked sandbags, raised thresholds, carried bundles to higher ground, where graves already waited. They made offerings to the river not to bribe it, but to remind themselves that speech is better than panic. Earthquakes, too, were folded into sense. A god of fire, Zhurong, and a rival, Gonggong, quarreled. The tilted sky is why rivers flow southeast and why the sun sets west. There is a reason, even if it's a story. Such explanations carry more than comfort. They carry instructions. If floods are the body memory of the land, you don't build folly on the floodplain. If fire gods have tempers, you keep water close and store grain properly. Myth became an index of lessons written without shame. A woman teaching a child to stack wheat may not mention you, but her hands repeat his method. Arrange the world so that it can do its own work. The Son of Heaven and the seal of approval. An emperor is called the Son of Heaven not because heaven needs heirs, but because governance must answer to something higher than preference. Omens were read: comets, famines, bumper harvests, with a mix of credulity and shrewdness. Ministers could say, with a straight face and a careful bow, that a ruler's misbehavior had soured the mandarins and the mulberries. In such talk lay a delicate shield for the powerless and a gentle bit for the powerful. To call revolution losing the mandate kept grief from turning only into anger. It turned it into ethics. The imperial court's rituals braided myth into calendar. If the Dragon Kings had been stingy with rain, the emperor led a ceremony in plain cloth to signal humility. If the harvest was good, thanks were given to the earth with bull and incense and the modest gravity of shared rice. The goal was not superstition, it was choreography. Align human hands with the rhythms that make life hospitable. Level 3. Historical perspective. From shaman songs to state liturgies. At the very beginning, stories lived in mouths and feet, chants by riverbanks, dances on dust that remembered deer paths, shamans with antlered headdresses translating the moods of wind. As villages piled up into towns and towns into states, myth did not retire. It put on official robes. Court scholars compiled, sorted, argued. The same god wore different names in different valleys. Editors made introductions and set up a seating chart. A bureaucracy of heaven mirrored the bureaucracy on earth. And the Jade Emperor's court looked increasingly like the palace, an endlessly recursive hall of order. Taoism took up the old woods and fogs and taught inward ways to meet them. Breathing like bellows, stillness like a pond. Confucianism cleaned the threshold and polished the bow. Buddhism crossed mountains from India and met them both halfway, offering compassion as a universal solvent. The result was less collision than sedimentation, layers of meaning keeping each other warm. A festival might honor a Buddhist bodhisattva while employing a Taoist priest and quoting a Confucian proverb about family. The point was not doctrinal purity, but communal coherence. Floods that speak across cultures, that Nüwa mended the broken sky and quelled the deluge has cousins in other libraries. In Mesopotamia, Utnapishtim sails through God-made waters. In ancient Israel, Noah turns a floating household into a covenant. In Greece, Deucalion and Pyrrha throw stones that become people. Floods are the imagination's favorite reset button, a way to say, the world needed rinsing. Yet China's version carries a special hue. The emphasis is less on rescue by a chosen remnant and more on repair by a patient artisan. After disaster, you melt stones and set props. After flood, you cut channels and teach water its manners. The hero is not the survivor on a mountain, but the engineer in mud. Such differences are not trivia. They feed forward into how a civilization faces trouble. Where some traditions frame catastrophe as punishment, this one often frames it as imbalance. The medicine, then, is skill and humility. Use spade, Nüwa's kiln, rather than spectacle. Living myths in a modern house. Open a calendar in January or early February, and the spring festival waits with firecrackers, dumplings, ancestral plates. The story behind the noise is a shy monster, Neon, who fears red and sound. But the practice, the visiting, the cleaning, the envelopes the color of luck, binds families into a yearly weave. 15 days later, the Lantern Festival floats soft moons down city streets and countryside lanes, and riddles hang from silk like fruit ripe for answers. In the 5th lunar month, dragon boats cut the water. Some row for Qu Yuan, the poet-statesman whose loyal heart outweighed his era's politics. Others row because rhythm and teamwork taste good in the body. In autumn, the moon rounds its back, and the story of Chang'e twines with fruit and reunion. A family cuts a cake so each piece shares the yolk of the moon, because wholeness tastes better when divided fairly. Zodiac animals still pace restaurant placemats, but they also stroll through conversations. A friend born in a tiger year laughs too loud. A rabbit prefers harmony to triumph. An ox keeps the team on task. Feng Shui consults the Bagua, not because destiny is rigid, but because furniture has moods and light needs a path. The compass that once helped sailors choose a coast now helps a couple choose a headboard. And both choices, in their different ways, are about waking up in safety. Even technology hums with old harmonies. A programmer names a side project You, a canal routing algorithm that finds the least disruptive way to move data through servers. A game designer builds a level on the back of a dragon that rains when you play the right tune. A ceramicist marries old glazes to new kilns and starts every batch with an incense stick for the ancestor who first risked firing a pot at that exact temperature. What endures? When names change. Dynasties rose and fell with the sighing weight of bamboo in a storm, but the stories traveled well. When a capital moved, shrines followed like loyal dogs. When laws changed, household altars did not ask permission to continue. Foreign faiths came on horseback and in caravans, lured by silk and argument. They left threads, added colors. The old gods were generous hosts. As long as the festivals arrived on time and the dead were remembered, the pantheon could share a table. In the 20th century, revolutions tried to make a new weather. Some rituals went quiet. Some gods unfolded their paper bodies and waited in drawers. Yet even then, the language kept its roots. The word for heaven in a congratulation, the way an old auntie scolded a typhoon as if it were a child, the shape of a roofline that still looked like a dragon about to launch. In the 21st, many returned to the open air. Temple fairs with QR codes, red envelopes flickering across phone screens, prayers typed with thumbs and sent upward by habit. Myth proved to be not fragile, but elastic. It kept its tone while changing its instruments. A soft thesis. If you step back, a pattern emerges. Creation is separation without contempt. Order is repair without pride. Power is responsibility that answers to weather. The heroes are craftspeople more than conquerors. And the highest compliment you can pay a ruler is that the river kept its course and everyone ate. The drama of this mythic world does not crave apocalypse. It prefers seasons, with the occasional lesson in humility delivered by water. And if, tonight, you feel any of this in your own room, an urge to tidy a corner, to call a grandmother, to open a window so air can say something kind, that too belongs here. You are, after all, one of Nüwa's people, shaped from the same patience and hurry, living in the space Pangu held open, learning Fuxi's grammar of change, walking with Yu's steadiness along edges that try to blur. The gods are grand. The work is small. The two meet where your hands touch the world. 4. The climax and the unknotting. The world had learned to breathe, but breath can turn sharp when storms argue with mountains. For a long while, people kept the peace by staying small, sowing in the pattern of rain, bowing to ancestors who could still hear the clink of bowls. Then a quarrel older than iron shouldered its way into the open. It was not only a clash of armies, it was a disagreement about the shape of reality. On one side stood Chi Yu, Lord of the Julie, horned in some tellings, metal-boned in others, the patron of bronze and of courage that sometimes forgets to carry wisdom. He was chaos with a code, not mindless wrecking, but the fierce insistence that life is forged hot, that fog and fear can be tools like any other. He stamped the earth, and drums answered, skins tightened with storms, so that thunder learned a marching rhythm. He called on the Earl of Wind and the Master of Rain, and they came laughing, wild-haired, scattering tents and maps and the fragile confidence of mortals. He set war mist across the plain, a quicksilver blindness that made the world 5 steps wide. On the other side rose Huangdi, the Yellow Emperor. If Qiyu was a hammer, Huangdi was a measuring string. He trusted banners and drums too, but his drums did not brag. They kept time. He gathered craftspeople, mathematicians, healers, and sky watchers. He asked them what the world preferred. A charioteer whispered of a wheel that remembers the south and points there faithfully. A scholar tuned pitch pipes to the seasons until even silence had intervals. Huangdi's court was not a glittering display so much as a workshop. The air smelled of ink, lacquer, and the patient burn of lamp oil. The two met where the land opened into the plain of Zhuolu. And the sky did what skies do when stories lean forward. It withheld. Dawn arrived as a rumor. Fog lay like folded wool. The first sound was not a shout, but a bell. Bronze, shouldered, and soft-voiced, struck once and left to bloom. Then came the answering thunder of Chiyu's drums, and the fog became a creature with weight and angles. Soldiers on Huangdi's side stumbled. The world had only corners, no horizon. Someone swore they could hear the river in every direction. Panic is a small god with very sharp teeth, and it ran up and down the lines, biting. Huangdi stayed still long enough to feel his own heart shrink and flare, and then he signaled. A chariot rolled forward, its pole-braced figure pointing steadily to the south, a man-shaped needle sewing a straight seam through swirling cloth. One by one, units aligned themselves to that invisible line. The drums on Huangdi's side changed their speech. Less bravado, more heartbeat, and the fog's tricks began to look like tricks. Qiyu was not shamed. He lifted a blade whose edge had tasted meteors and summoned a rain that came sideways, thick as ropes. Hail leapt like fish around ankles. Mud hugged calves and then knees. The wind earl hooted and pushed. The rain master poured and laughed. Tents went flat as emptied lungs. Under the chariot's calm finger, Huangdi looked up and called for drought. Not forever, not cruelly, but as a doctor draws blood to find the fever's source. From far-off dry lands came a maiden whose name was Drought. Hair the color of thirst, eyes cool as glazed clay. Where she walked, the rain remembered its manners. The wind, chastened, found the edge of the plain and worried it there. The battle did not turn on a single stroke. It was a long education. Chiyu's champions were quick and brave and flashy, as new metal loves to show off its shine. Huangdi's people were patient and slightly boring, as bridges are. Yinglong, the responsive dragon, came down to coil the muddy ground into paths, its long body teaching feet where to fall. Xuannu, the mysterious woman, offered arts that looked like magic, but were more like sober advice worn by poetry. Cut diagonals through chaos, hide sharpness, win by giving way. On Chiyu's side, tigers wore bronze on their foreheads and charged like arguments. On Huangdi's, carts carried healing herbs and stitches, and when soldiers fell, hands reached not for more blades, but for nettle thread and boiled water. All day the fog tried to keep its empire. It shrank under the compass's quiet finger, but not without a spiteful grace. When it suddenly cleared, the two leaders saw each other fully for the first time. They did not waste words. Their exchange, if you can call it that, was a dialogue between philosophies more than between men. One swung for brilliance, for the right to seize. The other parried for balance, for the right to last. Sparks leapt and died mid-air, ashamed to land in such company. By evening, Qiyu had spent his weather. The wind earl, sulking, went to pester distant sails. The rainmaster, emptying his last bucket, discovered he liked the sound of kettles better than war. Chi Yu stepped back, not broken but contained, as fire is tamed in a brazier. Huangdi did not gloat. He had seen enough of victory to know it is hungry, and will eat its own household if you let it. He raised a signal, 3 flags, in an order that meant, stop striking, start binding. And the plane breathed again. The stories like to say that Huangdi took Chi Yu's head and mounted it as a warning. And in some places, masks of the warlord do hang at thresholds to keep petty trouble away. But listen closer, and you hear another finish. That Chi Yu was not exiled from the world so much as reassigned. Metal kept its place in plow and chisel. Thunder returned to teaching trees how to bear wind. The terror of unruled weather became a festival dragon stitched from cloth and carried by a dozen laughing hands, its mouth warm with lantern light. We did not destroy the storm. We learned to dance with it. That was one war. There were others. In later ages, a book would tell of a great investiture, a cosmic administrative meeting where the fallen were given new titles: gods of gates, patrons of markets, keepers of wells, because order without generosity turns brittle, and the world prefers pliant strength. In those tales, demons became functionaries, their appetites re-employed as guardianship, their pride checked by duty. It is easy to mock bureaucracy. It is harder to admit that sometimes a ledger and a seal are kinder than a sword. Through all these confrontations, the stake was not abstract. People had to live. Wheat wanted 3 good rains. Rivers wanted to show off sometimes and be humored with extra dikes. Children wanted to grow into their names without learning the taste of ash. The mandate of heaven, which politicians later wore like a brocade coat, began as a simple pact. Keep the roads passable. Keep the water in its channels. Keep the taxes human, and heaven will sign off on your term with a decent harvest and no comets. Yet even after banners were rolled and chariots put away, another struggle simmered. Not a duel, but a tug of war between natural force and celestial statute. Storms do not read proclamations. Seeds do not respect sermons. Huangdi understood this. He turned from the battlefield to workshops and schools. He asked musicians to compose sets in which the 5 tones mapped to the 5 elements so that ears could practice balance. He asked physicians to notice meridians, not as mystery, but as a language the body speaks when it is trying to help you. He commissioned calendars with months that matched the moods of soil. And if the moon's mischief made the math untidy, he let an extra month slip in rather than force the world to lie. To the north, a farmer whose house had emptied to the war returned to a field stamped by boots and hoofprints. He set his feet, where Yinglong's coil had firmed the mud and pushed a plow that had once admired Chi Yu's shine. He sang an old irrigation song, and the tune fell into the new canals like seeds. His daughter tied her hair with red thread and brought water with both hands, an offering without altar. Downriver, lamp oil flavored prayers in a temple where the Dragon King received thanks he could taste, the kind that smells like hot rice and relief. Huangdi knew how victory rots if it is not aired. He climbed a low hill and listened, not for omens, not for flattering applause, but for the slope's opinion, for the feel of weather on skin. He thought of Chi Yu, of what raw country it takes to make a person like that. And he told his scribes to write a law that was not about punishment, but about proportion. A tax should bend with a bad harvest. A road should be repaired before a festival so feet can get where gratitude needs to go. In the borderlands, where fog is a seasonal resident rather than a war tactic, the last skirmish of gods and demons dwindled into story. The Rainmaster took a post behind the hills, wearing a blue robe and a smile that learned subtlety. The Wind Earl, after a short scolding, accepted a part-time position teaching kites. The Drought Maiden returned to her far country, appearing only when absolutely necessary, and then leaving quickly. Like a stern aunt who loves you, she used name when on door charms to frighten misfortune into behaving. Huangdi's name went into genealogies so that people could pretend, with a grin, to be related to the man who convinced fog to move aside. If you hold this climax in one hand and the earlier quiet in the other, you feel the civilization's preferred moral. The world is not saved by a bigger fist. It does not stay saved. It is continually saved by adjustment, by channels that expect flood and give it shape, by rights that give human pride a chore so it won't break things, by music that trains the breath to take its time. Even the compass on that chariot was not a magic trick. It was a promise kept between Earth's magnet and careful iron. And so the resolution comes not as a trumpet blast, but as a series of small, accurate gestures. Farmers stack grain under eaves that face the right wind. Potters listen to kilns as to temperamental relatives. Officials bow to tablets before opening a docket. Children light lanterns that turn the dark into a pet rather than a predator. The old antagonists, Storm and Statute, discover they share a house. The Storm agrees to knock. The Statute agrees to open the window when the room gets stale. Tonight, you stand where they all did, on ground taught to be ground by long argument, under a sky patched and propped with love. You keep your place not by taller walls, but by wiser bridges, not by a sword that remembers its edge, but by a calendar that remembers the needs of roots and hands. If you feel the itch to tidy a corner, to tune a string, to plan next week's meals around what the market whispers is ready, know this: you are practicing the end of that ancient battle. The fog lifts, not all at once, not forever. Enough. Bells cool. Drums settle on their rims. The dragon costume is folded and put away, its scales whispering as they rest. In the quiet, you can hear the river choosing the sea again, politely, and somewhere a chariot that no longer needs to prove anything is wheeled into a shed and left to its dream of south. This is the hour when stories lower their voices and sit beside us like old friends. After the thunder of battles and the patient labor of rivers, a gentler thought arrives. In these Chinese tales, the highest achievement is not conquest, but balance. Humans stand in the seam that Pangu held open, between earth that wants to settle and heaven that wants to rise. And our work, most days, is to keep that seam friendly. The myths teach it by example. Nüwa repairs more than she rules. Yu channels more than he damps. Fuxi listens before he teaches. Even the Jade Emperor governs by appointment and ritual, not by lightning on a whim. The lesson settles in like warm light. Harmony is not the absence of force. It is force arranged so no one has to shout. Balance here is intimate. It is a household habit. You see it when someone straightens a mat so a door opens cleanly, when an orchard is pruned with respect for next year's hunger, when a child is corrected with the kind of strictness that keeps shame away. Confucian rooms and Taoist gardens answer one another like call and response. Order providing form, softness providing breath. The 5 elements: wood, fire, earth, metal, water, are not substances lined up on a shelf. They are manners, seasons of behavior. A person can be wood for an afternoon, growing, flexible, and metal by evening, cutting clutter back to a kind edge. To live well is to feel which note the world needs and to offer it without fuss. When storms argue with calendars, the myths do not panic. They adjust. A flood becomes instruction to deepen a canal. A drought becomes permission to rest fields. A comet interrupts politics like a thoughtful cough, reminding the powerful that the sky is not a chandelier, but a partner. The mandate of heaven is not magic armor. It is a receipt for good stewardship that can be revoked. In this softer light, morality is practical. Kindness is a tool. Gratitude, ballast, ritual, memory's muscle. The cosmos does not demand perfection. It prefers sincerity repeated until it looks like grace. If you hold these stories to your ear, you hear a second lesson. Repair deserves honor. Many myths end not in fireworks, but in mending. Stone melted to cover a crack. A demon assigned to guard a gate. A wild river taught a path that lets villages sleep. There is drama in repair, but it is quiet drama. A patience that outlasts spectacle. The hero here is the person who stays until the job is done and leaves the place easier to live in. In that sense, the old tales are manuals disguised as music. And what of the eternal? The dragon still flies over China, though its flight is now woven of hands and cloth and festival laughter. Once it ruled rain, now it symbolizes unity and strength, the long curve of a people who prefer endurance to display. It is not a hoarder on a heap, but a bridge between cloud and field, between wish and weather. When drums carry the dragon down a street, you can feel the city synchronize, feet finding the same measure, neighbors rediscovering that their hearts can share tempo. The dragon's body is held up by many, children lifting the tail, elders guiding the head. It looks fierce, but it teaches cooperation better than any speech. Above that living ribbon, the moon keeps its old appointments. Chang'e's palace may be a story, but the mid-autumn moon can still soften a courtyard into a lake of pale gold. Families pass around cake and divide it fairly, because wholeness is not a trophy to hoard. It is a flavor to share. Somewhere, a tea kettle clicks. Somewhere, a paper rabbit on a lantern blinks in a mild wind. In the myths, immortality can be lonely. In life, longevity grows tender when it is full of visits. Look outward with me for a moment. The Great Wall lies under moonlight, like a quiet spine, stone cooling after a long day of heat. Its watchtowers blink at each other across ridges, not in alarm, but in recognition, the way old friends nod from a distance. Lichen writes, slow cursive on bricks. Grass thinks about next spring. The wall was built against danger. Tonight it holds the peace it wanted all along. You can almost imagine the steps remembering every foot. Soldiers, traders, workers, lovers. Their histories stacked like soft quilts inside the stones. Turn south and listen to the Yangtze. At this hour, its surface forgets its daytime arguments with wind and barges and simply moves. A faint breeze glides along it, gathering small scents. Rice straw, drying in courtyards. Crushed osmanthus from a tree that dropped its blossoms too generously. A wisp of smoke from a cooking fire reluctant to stop. Far out, a fisherman's lamp floats like a patient star. The boat rocks. A hull knocks lightly against itself, and the river accepts the confession with no need to answer. If rivers keep diaries, they write in currents. The Yangtze's entry tonight would be short. Still here. Still going. Time, too, sets its own temperature. In these stories, it does not rush to endings. It circles. Festivals come around like reliable friends. Ancestors receive fruit and tea, and then, in some unshowy way, share courage back. The zodiac turns its wheel, tigers making brave messes, rabbits smoothing them with a smile, and we pretend to be surprised even as we enjoy being predictable. History, so full of noise at noon, relaxes into cycles by midnight. Seasons become trustworthy, not because they never surprise, but because we have learned how to meet their surprises without breaking. And inside the house, any house, yours included, the wisdoms land softly. A shelf is cleared, a crack is sealed, a stringed instrument is tuned not for an audience, but for the room. Someone writes a note to a relative across an ocean. Someone else saves a handful of rice to scatter for birds at dawn. These are small gestures, but that is the point. The seam between earth and sky is kept healthy by small, accurate acts. The myths quoted drums and dragons so we would remember the scale of things. Then they hand the work to us at human size. Perhaps this is the most companionable idea the tales offer. We are allowed to be little and still matter. The gods take appointments. The dragon dance needs volunteers. The calendar waits for us to tie ribbons to it. If we bring a bowl of oranges to a table of names and speak a thank you that no one else hears, the cosmos does not laugh. It nods. If we plant a tree, knowing we will age out of its shade, the world counts that as literacy. In the distance, another image gathers. On the step side of the wall, the wind rubs its thumb over grass until the hills purr. In river towns, windows throw small squares of gold onto stone, then fold them up again. The endless movement of time does not erase the fingerprints of those who lived before. It oils them so they glide. We inherit not only achievements, but habits. The preference for repair over rage, for proportion over pride, for music that ends one phrase by beginning the next. So we come to our quiet. The old quarrels between chaos and decree have learned to share a table. Water still argues, but now within banks that let rice grow. Fire still has opinions, but mostly about tea. The dragon still flies, now carried by laughter. The moon keeps her graceful job. The gods are near enough to borrow salt from, and far enough to give privacy. If you listen, you may hear Pangu breathing in the distance, the rise and fall built into every horizon. You may feel Nüwa's careful fingers at the edges of things, checking the seams. You may notice Yu's footpaths, pretending to be roads, and Fuxi's lines, pretending to be landscapes. When the world feels large, these stories make it legible. When the world feels small, they open it like a fan. They do not insist on belief. They offer a way to move, to lift, to place, to adjust, so that living together is less abrasive. We leave them tonight as we found them, not pinned like butterflies, but alive, capable of returning whenever the door is propped. Moonlight rests on stone. A river keeps its appointment with the sea. Somewhere, a bell is struck once and left to bloom. The sound goes out, meets hills, comes back thinner, kinder. Between that first ring and the last echo is where we live. People of clay and haste and patience, keeping company with dragons and ancestors and the weather, all of us learning the same lesson at our own pace. Arrange what you can, forgive what you cannot, and let the rest move like water toward what it loves. The night stands very still, and in that stillness, the oldest image returns. A riverbank, soft with silt, and a patient goddess shaping figures from clay. She does not speak. She simply lifts, smooths, and sets us down, one by one. so we can learn our steps. If you look closely at your own hands, you can almost see the memory of her touch, the faint whirl that wants to mend what's torn, the steady curve that knows how to hold. We are her people still. Each time we fix a chair instead of throwing it out, each time we untangle a misunderstanding without reaching for sharper words, each time we leave a light on until a loved one comes home, the clay remembers. Some of us carry Nüwa's unhurried care. Some of us keep a little of her early haste, quick to leap, quick to try again. Together, we make a village of tempos, a chorus that finds harmony by listening. Around us, the world takes on its gentle gold. Moonlight rests along a windowsill like a ribbon forgotten after a celebration. The Great Wall cools under that same light, not as a scar, but as a long, breathing line that once worried and now simply watches. Far away, the Yangtze gives the night back to the hills in long, quiet sentences, and a fisherman's lamp drifts, small and certain, like a promise kept. Somewhere a bell is struck once. The note walks the ridges and returns thin with kindness. The dragons we met have folded themselves into festivals. The emperors have put down their seals. The heroes have hung their tools on pegs by the door. What remains is the manner of their work, the preference for balance over noise, for repair over spectacle. It is not a grand lesson. It is precisely the size of daily life. A mat straightened, a message sent, tea shared, steam rising in a curl that looks suspiciously like a cloud from an old painting. Myths have not vanished. They have only changed clothes to walk beside us. They show up wearing street shoes and winter coats, sitting in the next seat on the train, nodding toward a stranger who needs it more. They ride in pockets as red envelopes become phone screens. They hang in kitchens where ancestors eat first. They hum in a child's game where a paper rabbit bobs in lamplight and refuses to be tragic. They do not insist. They accompany. So let the night keep its soft grammar. Stone cools. Bronze forgets heat. Water thinks about the sea and takes its time. If you feel a small impulse, to tidy a corner, to write a thank you, to step outside and let the air say something gentle, follow it. That's the scene we live in. The space Pangu opened, kept in good repair by hands that remember who shaped them. Before we part, hold the riverbank image once more. The careful thumb, the curve of a palm, the tiny figure lifted into light. That is us, still damp with invention, still drying into character. We will smudge, we will crack, and then we will be mended, because that is the craft we inherited. Walk a little further with these stories if you like, or let them walk with you, changing their clothes as the hour changes, keeping pace at the edge of your errands. The lantern dims, but does not go out. The drumskin cools on its rim. The sky, patched and propped, leans down close enough to hear us breathe. And in that soft, golden measure, we say goodnight to an old company that never really leaves. Clay children of a river goddess, moving gently through a world that prefers to be arranged with care, side by side with myths that learned our names and chose to stay.